What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home here at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again is Brian Twining. We are here to talk some Week 10 waiver wire. We got a few extra little wrinkles this week because as we get down to the wire here, it's the names are a little harder to find. The options are a little less exciting. But we're going to give you some names to add, some names to drop, some names to question. But we want to remind you guys that every Sunday morning, Brian and I both go live talking fantasy football, talking betting, answering your questions. We really appreciate everybody who's been hopping in the chat, joining the show, bringing the content. It's really been a fun experience, and we've kind of built it out over the last several weeks. So if you want some help Sunday morning, feel free, drop a line. But Brian, how are you doing? And as we head into Monday night, how are your fantasy teams doing?
I'm doing pretty well, I have to say. In two of my home league redraft leagues, I'm easily on my way to the playoffs at 6-2, with probably going to be about 7-2 in both of these, as long as no miraculous comebacks on Monday Night Football. And then,
Yeah,
like DFS has been treating me well. Betting has been decent. This week was not the best week of them, but I'm looking forward to Week 10. I think this is my favorite part of fantasy football. Like, this time of the season is when you really have to start looking ahead. If you have secured that playoff spot or you're looking to get into the playoffs, this is when you start cutting the dead weight and adding potential league winners.
Yep. And if you're like me and you have some teams that are the dead weight, then you look at something like DFS as a way to dive in. For those of you that are interested in golf and fantasy golf and the Masters, Bobby Adcock, another fake pigskin writer, and I will be doing the DFS preview on his show. It's called the Swipe Right Sports Pod or something. I'll tweet it out a bunch from my Twitter feed. I'm also wrangling him on to talk some Masters picks from a betting perspective. So we're going to try and finagle that. I think that's going to happen on Tuesday. I'm trying to figure out all the details, but like I said, follow the show on there, subscribe to this feed. You'll get that. You'll get hit the notification bell. You'll notice when we go in a new content is uploaded and ready. But we're going to talk some waiver wire. But before we do that, Brian, before we talk about the names you need to add, we're going to go through some names that you could potentially want to say goodbye to. We're going to call this section Hold'em and or Fold'em. A little nod to the old Kenny Rogers song, and some names that people drafted high feel like they really haven't came around like we expected. And the first guy is Jonathan Taylor. We told people to sit him on Sunday. Yes, he scored a touchdown, but from a production standpoint, he's in a backfield that splits the work. He has been the least impressive running back of all the running backs. And like, I know you probably spent like a decent draft pick, but a guy that in back-to-back weeks since the bye has 22 yards and 27 yards rushing. Not incredibly involved in the passing game. Nyheim Hines kind of has that locked down. 97% roster. Like, is this a guy that, if you have running backs and you need receiver help, or if you're looking for a QB streamer or all that stuff, are you comfortable saying goodbye to Mr. Jonathan Taylor this week?
That is a really difficult question to answer because, I mean, you spent such a high draft capital on this dude, likely in the first 4 rounds, maybe first 5 rounds on Jonathan Taylor, expecting him to be the every down back behind Marlon Mack. And then after Mack's injury, the assumption was Jonathan Taylor was going to see anywhere from 15 to 20 touches a game minimum. And now we're in this situation where it's basically each running back is seeing a third of the snaps, let alone the fact that Jonathan Taylor is actually getting out touched by Jordan Wilkins 2-1 almost the last couple of weeks. If somebody is still willing to trade me a wide receiver that I potentially need, or maybe another option at running back who's more of a PPR option. Like, hell, I'd even take a JD McKissick right now on my roster in a PPR league over a Jonathan Taylor with the way that they've been rotating those backs there in Washington. This is not a good situation to be in as a fantasy owner, as you cannot trust this dude in any game. And he is not somebody that I would want on my roster because basically you're not getting any ceiling plays out of him.
Yeah, he is not providing a safe floor. He's not providing upside. If you have somebody in your league that's willing to give you something for him as kind of a dart, like I would make that move. But yeah, I'm in a position where if I need to find a roster spot and he is my best available player to cut, I'm absolutely fine saying adios. What about Le'Veon Bell? This is a Chiefs team that's heading into their bye. This is a Chiefs team that managed to split the workload with CEH, Le'Veon Bell, and Darrell Williams. Bell's another guy. I know running backs are hard to come by, but if he's not seeing volume, he doesn't have that upside that we thought maybe he could in a complementary role to CEH. Are you willing to say adios to Le'Veon Bell?
It's already been done in one of my two home leagues. I dropped Bell for a defense of all positions to fill a roster spot. This is again, we had expected to see Bell come in and be the primary relief of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, only to see this week it was actually Darrell Williams who was the primary pass catching back. And it seems like Kansas City hasn't been able to implement Bell and his skill set quite yet. And for a team that with as explosive as an offense as it is, their running game has looked abysmal the past couple of weeks. Going into a game against a Panthers defense that has been run on by every team that they faced this year, and the fact that Kansas City wasn't able to do that just shows how beat up their offensive line is and how this team is really ran through Patrick Mahomes. And knowing that, and the fact that they love Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I am ready to just cut bait on Le'Veon and let somebody else deal with the headache of the potential of him doing anything.
Yeah, 100% with you. And as we mentioned, all these players, they have a lot of name value. So if you're in a league with somebody who lives with draft day value, who wants to pay you for it, even if it seems like, if it's better than what you can find on the waiver wire, then make the move. Like, don't be like, well, it's Le'Veon Bell, I could do more. No, you can't. They're garbage.
Yeah, exactly.
Aren't helping your fantasy team. They're just clogging up your bench. And as Brian said, there's been too many leagues decided with Tim Hightowers that holding on to Le'Veon Bell, like, I know it's a seemingly good situation. If something were to happen and this and that and the third, he's not getting work, and it's going to be frustrating. Speaking of frustrating, Tom Brady hates Mike Evans. I don't know what he did to him. Antonio Brown made his appearance last week in a game where the Buccaneers were down 31. I think Mike Evans saw like 6 targets. He's only been productive with Chris Godwin out. I was really hoping in a couple of leagues that with Godwin out, he would have a blow up game. I'd be able to swing him for something. Doesn't seem to be the case. What about Mike Evans? Are you comfortable moving on from him, whether it's in a trade or via a waiver wire swap?
I think Mike Evans, I'm slightly more optimistic on him. I was really high on him coming into the year because I thought he would fulfill that big bodied downfield role like a Randy Moss did for the 07 Patriots.
Me and you both.
And it just hasn't come to fruition. They're just not on the same page, he and Brady. And now with the addition of Antonio Brown, who he played a lot more snaps than I think they had wanted and or we had anticipated last night. And I really do think that this offense is going to be ran through Chris Godwin and Brown, as Brady seems to like those kinds of receivers much more at this stage of his career. And with Brady's kind of rapport that he already has with Scotty Miller, Tyler Johnson looks pretty good. I think this might be a situation where Mike Evans is just continuously faded out of the offense. And with the potential of him getting hurt on every play, like last night we saw him grabbing his groin area. Like, did he hurt his groin or did he get kicked in the manhood and then leave for a play? Because he re-entered. But I'm not dropping Evans, but I mean, at this point, I think he's unplayable.
If they're not going to use him, I don't know why they didn't trade him at the deadline. I feel like you could have got something decent for him, but I'm no GM, so what would I know? I'm probably closer to you where I'm not really trying to drop him if I can. Like the running backs are much more droppable for me. But if you can find somebody in your league who thinks maybe he could be, based upon his name value, based upon where his draft day price is worthwhile, then he's another guy. Personally, I'd rather drop him than Marquise Brown, who has also been frustrating in a Ravens offense that just doesn't have the luster it had a year ago. I think defensive coordinators have figured out some of the stuff they're doing. They don't like going to their best players like Mark Andrews and J.K. Dobbins for some reason. And I expected Hollywood to break out in a big way. And like he had his 10 target game against Cincinnati. And I thought, okay, here we go. And then 6 targets against Philly, 57 yards, had 3 yards against the Steelers, had 38 yards last week against Indy. Like there was opportunities, and I don't know what's going on that offensive side of the ball. I'm still a believer, and I still think he is clearly the number one option in this offense. But Lamar's trajectory and kind of the way he's trending it's a little worrisome if I was a Ravens fan.
Yeah, will the real Lamar Jackson please stand up? I mean, he's kind of been exposed this year as from a pure passer perspective, as teams are trying to limit his ability to run the ball. And you're really seeing that in his inability to hit open guys, hit Marquise Brown down the field like he was able to do last year. Brown only has 2 touchdowns this year. He's currently wide receiver 46 in the Yahoo scoring format, which is half PPR, which that is horrible. He's behind Michael Gallup, who is no longer rostered by people. Keelan Cole from Jacksonville, he's behind. He's behind Tim Patrick. He's behind one of our favorite dudes, David Moore from Seattle, who's the 3rd option on a ridiculously high volume passing offense, and he's just ahead of a guy like Randall Cobb. He's kind of in a situation where if I'm in a good spot, like for instance, like for me, I actually roster Marquise Brown, and I'm already basically in the playoffs. I'm going to hold him just with the fact that if they have a good matchup, there's the possibility of him having that boom game. But he's not an every week play by any means right now, as he can lay that egg like we saw in Pittsburgh where he was saved by the touchdown.
Yeah. Of the 4 players we talked about, he's the guy that I'm trusting the most, and I think can be the best player down the stretch. I'm not optimistic about any of them, and like I said, if you can find a way to swing some of these pieces for other options that you believe in more, I would do that. Let's run through some names that we are adding this week and talk about who we want to target. The one thing I will say before we dive into any of this, if Mike Davis is available in your fantasy league, do whatever you have to do. Number 1 waiver priority, all of your fab, whatever it takes. Proven to be a stud. McCaffrey's out. We'll see how long. And this offense is finding ways to be productive, even in it's not always happening exactly the way we expect. But Mike Davis is a stud and can be a reason why you win a fantasy championship. So if you're in a league where somebody dropped him, I would be rushing to add him. Let's talk about his teammate Curtis Samuel, who is rostered in 30% of Yahoo leagues. 9 targets on Sunday, 105 yards, a touchdown, back-to-back weeks with at least 3 carries. With Christian McCaffrey out, with this offense looking pretty solid, with the defense having big question marks, Curtis Samuel, 5, 6, 5, and 9 targets the past 4 weeks, becomes a guy, especially in any sort of half or full PPR, any sort of rushing upside, extra points, becomes a guy that I'm incredibly interested in.
Yeah, Curtis Samuel for me is probably my favorite ad this week on the wire. I mean, like you said, he has 4+ receptions or 50+ receiving yards in each of the last 6 games. He has 4 touchdowns the last 3 games with 2 rushing touchdowns in that time. They're getting a Tampa Bay defense this week who was just exposed against quick passing offenses, which is what Carolina likes to do. And the fact that, like you said, Curtis Samuel was utilized in the running game this week with Christian McCaffrey back, and now that McCaffrey's going to be out again, I think there's an even higher likelihood that we see Samuel see an even increased role, like we had anticipated earlier in the year, out of the backfield with Mike Davis running back there, in an offense that's running a ton of plays, They're playing extremely efficient on the offensive side of the ball. Teddy Bridgewater seems to hate DJ Moore and absolutely love Robbie Anderson and Curtis Samuel, much to the dismay of DJ Moore drafters. But yeah, Curtis Samuel, for me, just the amount of volume that he's seeing the last few weeks and actually over the duration of the year is living up to the kind of hype that we've seen the last couple of years out of Carolina.
Yep. Let's talk about Josh Reynolds, who's going to be in an absolute smash spot this week. Brian, we've talked about, we don't necessarily love the third wide receiver in a lot of offenses, but this week in this matchup for a guy that if you're scrambling a wide receiver, with the Chiefs on bye, with other teams on bye, could make for a nice 1 week plug-in.
Yeah, Josh Reynolds is kind of like how we talked about David Moore last week going up against Buffalo in a game that we expected Seattle to have to throw a ton, even as the third option. This guy, Josh Reynolds, he's going to be the third option going up against the Seattle defense, who just allowed 3 Bills receivers to go over 70 yards, and I think 4 guys to have over 4 receptions. He actually has 4 receptions in each of the last 2 games against Chicago and Miami, who are both extremely good defensive pass defenses. Now he gets the Seattle defense, who's absolutely horrible, who's likely to miss more their corners again. If you're in a really tough spot and you have injuries at wide receiver, you're looking for a flex play, you have guys on a bye week this week. Josh Reynolds for me is a great flyer and somebody who can add instant value with the potential of his floor being, 4 catches for 50 yards and the addition of a touchdown as a possibility.
Yep, and a great option if you're playing DFS. That it could be an interesting option. Let's talk Tim Patrick, 21%. Nice to see him bounce back and get back in the flow of the offense. Obviously, Drew Lock is throwing a ton, 9 targets this week, only caught 4 for 29 yards, did find the end zone to help salvage his day. I know of the, obviously Jerry Jeudy is the number 1 guy there, but before the injury, Jerry Jeudy was the number 2 with Patrick being number 1. So for a guy that's this widely available, he makes sense, especially as I mentioned in a Broncos offense that's going to throw as much as they are.
Yeah, Patrick had actually scored 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games that he didn't leave with injury. So this is a guy who, like you said, Drew Lock has thrown the ball over 120 times the last 3 games. So this offense is finally unleashing Lock's arm here. They're unlocking Lock, to say. But so yeah, like Patrick as the de facto number 1, kind of taking over that Cortland Sutton role, who we saw Drew Lock love last season, I think is a guy who you should be rostering right now.
Yeah, I mean, Denver faces the Raiders, the Dolphins, the Saints, the Chiefs, and the Panthers the next 5 weeks. All offenses that can produce enough and will force them to throw to keep up. That's why we also like KJ Hamler in deeper leagues. Obviously, a little more of a PPR type option, but another guy who's seeing a ton of volume, had 10 targets on Sunday, 6 for 75 yards, scored a touchdown the week before. Clearly the third or fourth option. We'll see what Noah Fant's return or potential return could look like. Obviously left this game early. If he is out this week, that could open up more volume to go Hamler's way. And I think a big part of why he was so productive in this game. But if you're looking for somebody who's widely available, makes a ton of sense. Let's go to running backs, and we got a couple names. It's really gross at running back, and obviously, hopefully you have options. Hopefully you can add Mike Davis. Hopefully maybe Justin Jackson. I don't know. But Duke Johnson, 16%. David Johnson left this game. He's involved in the passing game, can run a little bit. The Texans' offense has looked much better since Bill O'Brien left. If you're desperate, it could make a ton of sense.
Yeah, Houston, it was unabashed to give Duke Johnson the every down role after David Johnson left. He saw 16 carries and he had 4 receptions on the day in a game that if David Johnson were to miss against his Browns team, who is, they're kind of at the back half of the NFL at defending against the running back this year, he's another guy who is in a smash spot play, especially in DFS. If David Johnson were to miss, Duke was right back in the spotlight as a guy who we absolutely love.
Yep. JD McKissick is worth your time if you're in any sort of PPR league, half or full. 9 catches on 14 targets last week. only 2 against Dallas, but 6, 8, and 6, or 6, 8, and 8 the 3 weeks prior. So basically six or more targets, 3 or 4 of the past 5 weeks. Won't contribute a ton on the ground, but it is definitely worthwhile if he's going to be seeing this much work. And Wayne Gallman, 25%. I know it's gross. There's potential of a Devonta Freeman return, but Brian, this is a guy who's found the end zone 3 straight weeks. And if the Giants offense is not going to be absolutely putrid, maybe Wayne Gallman is worth your time. Like at this point, he might be, if he starts this week and Devonta Freeman's out, like I'd rather start him than Le'Veon Bell or Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, no, that's a great call. Like I was just about to say, I would rather have both of these aforementioned guys than a Jonathan Taylor right now, as McKissick has, like you said, 6+ receptions in 4 of the last 5 games. And Wayne Gallman is a guy who has taken over basically as the lead dog there in New York. And they're getting a Philadelphia Eagles team who Gallman found the end zone against 3 weeks ago. So this is not an opponent that they're unafraid to run the ball against. And Gallman in that game also, he had 5 receptions. So you're looking at a guy who has 20 touch upside for an offense who's kind of slightly found a way here to move the ball, and they're not as inept as we had anticipated. So yeah, no, Gallman and McKissick are great values right now.
I want to throw out a couple names as with the Chiefs on bye, people are going to be scrambling, I think, a little bit to find options to fill in Patrick Mahomes' shoes. We have Jared Goff against those aforementioned Seattle Seahawks. Opportunity is absolutely there. Derek Carr facing those Denver Broncos at home. We saw the past couple weeks what Justin Herbert and Matt Ryan did to that defense. There's plenty of wiggle room for any quarterback to have a solid day. Beyond there, I mean, do you like Drew Lock hasn't been great, especially with his turnovers, but the Raiders defense is one you can throw on. The last 2 weeks, their offense has gotten down significantly, and they've had to throw to come back. 248-3, 313-2. I don't love him, but he is widely available, and if you're scrambling, saying I need somebody, could make sense. And Jake Luton, like at Green Bay, like I mean, that's like if you're desperate, maybe, but even at that point, maybe you can hopefully find something better. But any of those names jump out to you as people you'd like to stream?
I mean, obviously, I think Jared Goff for me is a top 10 play this week going up against the Seattle defense. So if he's there and if you're a Newton roster or something, and Cam's your only option, definitely go out and get Jared Goff this week against Seattle, as the Patriots have to play the Ravens, who, they flex their muscles this weekend against Indianapolis. And then a guy who I'm looking at, like, this might sound as disgusting as anything, but Alex Smith. I know he threw 3 interceptions against the Giants this week, which
so bad and cost me a cover. I won't go there. Absolutely.
One of them was because J.D. McKissick actually slipped on a route, which basically made the pass go directly to Blake Martinez. But, this Washington offense is one who they like to run out of shotgun, which is where Alex Smith excels. He's going to get the ball into his playmaker's hands, as we saw him do with F1 Terry McLaurin. And, you get those big play bonuses there. And then they're going to be going up against a Lions team whose defense has been horrible this year, in a game where Detroit might be able to move the ball, even if Kenny Galladay is not there, meaning that Washington is going to have to score a little bit more. They're going to have to pick up the pace slightly. And I like Alex Smith's efficiency and the possibility of him going for over 202 touchdowns. If you're in desperate need for a quarterback to offer some decent amount of points.
Yeah, I think we're simpatico on Goff being the number 1 option. I like Derek Carr number 2. I actually think Tua is worthwhile too. Tua, this week
that was impressive.
It looks solid against Arizona. 248, 2 touchdowns. Now he goes home. He's got the Chargers coming to town. Another opportunity. I mean, locks. This defense has pieces, but it's also trading away Desmond King. They're figuring out the back end. They can give up points. I think Tua, is a pretty widely available quarterback, could make a ton of sense as well.
Yeah, especially with his running upside.
Absolutely. All right, Brian, this was a lot of fun. Good to talk. Good to chat. We ran through a ton of names. If there's somebody in the waiver wire preemptive strike you think could be a league winner, we're talking about week 15, 16, 17, drop the name in the chat. If you want to talk betting, we'll be back Thursday. As I mentioned, we'll have some Masters preview up on the channel, so make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell, all that good stuff. And then for week 10, we'll see you Sunday morning. It's 11:30 Eastern. We'll hopefully help get the right players in your lineup, hopefully help you win. For Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.